ACCCM with multiple connector, best practices from IT Navigator. Okay, so right now we're going to talk about the challenges around deploying multiple connectors, and most of the control manager implementations worldwide are multi-connector implementations. And sometimes if things are not planned correctly, or if the customer thinks that everything should be done, in the next world, instead of doing actually a real implementation, things can go a little bit wrong. And we are here in order to share with you our best practices for more than 500 implementations that we did in the last couple of years. So we learned a lot from a lot of different types of customers, from different industries, and the most important thing that we learned is that every single customer is different in every element, and it's almost impossible to take one thing that you did in one customer and move it to another. The challenges around deploying multiple connectors vary between different environments. So the main reason why Control Manager is brought into the environment is to solve the daily burden of administration of multiple systems. This is what you will see most of the times. People have multiple systems that they need to administer. They need to go to System Manager, CM, IQ, and the AACC, for example, and they don't want to do it. They want to try and simplify the way they do administration. And what Control Manager actually is here for, it's in order to reduce this burden. But deploying Control Manager into a multi-connector environment should be considered very carefully. Before you're running to a specific direction, you should take a look at some of the things that we are going to raise in this webinar. First of all, we need to understand that, of course, we're talking about two different customer types. Existing customer environments where ACCM is installed into an environment that these Avaya products are already up and running in production, and greenfield environments installing Control Manager into the environment together with the new Avaya environment. Of course, that this is a completely different story. It's much simpler when you come to a greenfield environment comparing to an existing environment. And in the greenfield environment, I can tell you that we strongly recommend that Control Manager will be there in the environment from day one. So all the initial setup of the users, of the roles, of the agents, everything will be done from Control Manager. And don't do the mistake of bringing Control Manager later in the installation phase. Do it as early as possible. But the big challenge is existing customers. And a greenfield, by the way, can be changed and turned into an existing customer very quickly if you will not bring Control Manager in an early stage. But we're now going to focus on existing customers because this shows you the biggest challenges of deploying a multi-connector environment. So there are several challenges when you look at the deployment, and you should consider these 6 elements that appear on the screen. First of all, challenge number 1 is syncing the existing data from the different systems into Control Manager. You know that in existing environments, you have data all over the place. You have data, of course, inside CM or inside System Manager. You have data inside CMS, IQ, AACC, IC, or whatever system you're running. And syncing the data and planning the data synchronization is the most important thing, and this is why it appears as the #1 topic in the following slide. And I'm going to talk about what are the things that you need to consider, but the most important thing that everybody should understand, it's not a button that you push and then everything is synced. Because if you want to have a flat environment with no locations, no permissions, okay, yes, you can click a button. But if you plan to have multiple locations, you want to have role-based access control, and you're going to use some kind of partitioning, it's not a button that you push. You need to plan it, and then you push the button later. Second thing is defining the roles and permissions. So you're coming from a world that you have dedicated administrative systems, and a lot of times you did not allow people that are not Avaya experts to touch your environment, and suddenly you move into an environment that includes a lot of roles and permissions that never existed in the past. And deciding what roles and what permissions you will have is a key element. Designing the new processes for system administrators is also a key issue. Why? Because people are used to open a command line interface and type an extension and then send an email to somebody, I created the extension, now create the user. These things need to change. If you're going to deploy Control Manager and use it in a similar way like using the dedicated Avaya administrative tools, you will lose the advantages. You need to think about how Control Manager is going to change the process and what type of new things it will bring to the environment. I'm not saying that you need to lock down the Avaya interfaces and stop using ASA, because in reality it's never going to happen and we know it. But you need to plan the processes so people will understand what is the added value that Control Manager will bring them. Fourth element is training the users to use the new interface. And it is a challenge, because if you're coming into an environment that people are using Avaya for products for 5, 6, 10 years, it's going to be a challenge to show them a web interface. Even though they're very used to using internet, to browse websites, to go to Google, for their Avaya environment, if you show them a thin client application, they are in shock. So this is a process that needs to be planned. Number 5 is related to number 1, which is the sync schedule. It's related to the sync. It's not the initial sync that needs to be planned, but the sync schedule also affects a lot of different things that you're going to do inside the environment. And of course, the cut-over approach, where you have 2 different approaches that you can take, the step-by-step versus the one-time cutover, which of course makes a lot of people scared, but in reality it might work, and we'll see when it can work and when it cannot work. So first element, syncing existing data. So the initial sync process is a very important step when you deploy Control Manager into an existing Avaya environment. And there are 3 types of systems that are synced with Control Manager. And this is very important to understand before deploying the product into an existing environment. 3 different system types, and when I say system type, I mean the type of synchronization capability that Control Manager has with each one of these products. The types are listed in the table in front of you. We have a full sync system. Full sync, it means full bidirectional. Whatever you type inside the Avaya native interface will be synced into Control Manager. Whatever you do in Control Manager moves into the native Avaya interface. Now, when we talk about sync, we talk about not about the initial sync that you do in day 1. We talk about the daily sync that you can run. So let's say we deploy Control Manager, we are starting to use it. 2 weeks after that, I'm going directly into ASA and I do a change. This is what we call a sync, okay? Now, full bidirectional sync process is included only in the 4 systems that appear over here: Communication Manager, Modular Messaging, Aura Messaging, CMS, and AACC. That means that you can go into these native interfaces, do your change there, if it is an add, a delete, or an edit command, and these 3 elements are important because they are different commands, and changes that you will do in the native interface will be reflected in Control Manager. When you do an edit, the edit will appear immediately in Control Manager because Control Manager doesn't store this data inside the Control Manager database. So if you go and change an agent or change a subscriber, then immediately when you retrieve it in Control Manager, you will see the updated data. If you will add an agent inside AACC, or if you add delete, for example, somebody from CMS or a subscriber or a CM station, the add and delete comments are moved in the synchronization process. It is a schedule process. And we'll talk about the scheduling options in a couple of minutes, but these 4 systems have a full sync. The second sync type that we have is a one-time sync only. One-time sync only means that these systems are synced or can be synced in the deployment phase, but after you sync it, you need to use Control Manager for your administrative capabilities of these systems. You don't have a bidirectional sync or a full sync like for the systems that are listed above. And the systems are IC, IQ, Proactive Contact, ACR, QM, WFM, System Manager, Present Services, and conferencing. And that means that after you do the initial cutover, all the add and delete comments should be done from control manager. So for example, if you will go directly into IQ and you will delete a user, we will not know that this user was deleted. So control manager will know nothing about it. So this thing needs to be taken into consideration. The third system type is no sync required. No sync required means that control manager actually gets all the information directly from the external system and doesn't even store a pointer in the control manager database to that element. And the systems that are managed that way are Voice Portal and Experience Portal, Proactive Outreach Manager, CCE, and 1X Agent Central Management. So for these four systems, you don't need to basically to sync anything. You can do changes inside the native administrative tools. You can do changes inside Control Manager. It will be reflected automatically. But the important thing here, as you can see out of this table, is the second item, one-time sync only. So if you want to deploy Control Manager in an environment that includes Avaya Interaction Center, and Control Manager is responsible for managing all the agents and users in your IC environment, do not use IC administrative tools after you launched Control Manager in production to add or delete or edit IC users. You know what edit you can do? You can edit IC users inside IC administrative tools. But you cannot add or delete it from IC because then Control Manager will not know about it and the user will appear inside Control Manager as an IC user. There are ways to work around it. If you want to build custom applications, it's possible, even though we don't recommend it. We recommend that this specific element will be done from Control Manager. I'm not saying to lock down, for example, IC administration in order to not allow people to stop and start IC services. These things should be done and must be done inside the IC administrative tool. But not allowing people to do add, delete, or of IC agents and users, I think this is a minor request. And when you think about what you need to sync and how you need to sync it, these three sync modes should be in front of your face before you make a decision, because it affects your cutover plan, it affects your data, it affects everything that you plan to do, and you need to understand it, and the customer needs to understand it. Now, the sync questions that must be answered. There are 6 questions that should be answered before you are starting the sync, and they can affect your sync planning. Do you have a multi-location environment? This is the most important question. If you have a flat environment with no locations, no need for any tenanting, partitioning, and role-based access that is too much related to locations, then you can feel free and sync your environment. But if you have multi-locations, you need to think how your entities will be distributed across the locations. Because what you want to achieve is that after the sync process, all the different entities that you synced, like agents, like skills, like agent groups, like extensions, everything will already be assigned to the relevant control manager location. So you need to think about it before you run the sync, and you need to think how you can achieve it. So for example, all the numeric elements, like extensions, the agent IDs, the skill numbers, these things can be partitioned and assigned to a specific location in the sync process by using the control manager dialing plan. So if you created a dialing plan, then you can easily assign things to the dialing plan and sync it. But there are other things, for example, CMS agent groups or IC users that are not numeric, and you need to think about how you're going to do this assignment to a location, and these things need to be planned. How many agents will be synced into the environment is another important element. Why is it important? Because let's take an hypothetical scenario that you have 40,000 agents inside your environment. And we had this problem with a very big customer. They decided to sync the environment as a flat environment. What happened is that all the agents, all the 40,000 agents, were synced to a single agent group. Now, from performance perspective, I'm not recommending to do it. It's not that it will not work, it will work. But doing something inside the environment related to this agent group is going to be very slow. So think about it. think about how you want to sync your agents. If you don't have a large environment, okay, you can sync everybody to the same group, and then later on use the control manager bulk assignment capabilities in order to distribute the agents between groups. But if you can plan the sync in a way that agents will be assigned or users will be assigned to specific groups up front, it will help you. It will help you in the entire process later on, and you will not need to sit in front of an Excel file and start moving agents between different places. Another important question is, are you going to sync agent groups from external systems? So it's not only about syncing the agents from AACC, IC, or CM, it's also about the story of agent groups. If you're syncing agent groups for CMS or IQ, you need to think about it, because, for example, in CMS, agent groups are, it's a flat entity. It's not related to anything. It's just an agent group. In Control Manager, it's different. An agent group is assigned to a location. And if your user doesn't have access rights to a location, you will not be able to see this agent group. So if you want to use role-based access and location-based access in Control Manager, think about this and make sure that you know how you're going to sync the agent groups and how you're going to do the assignment. You can do the assignment after the sync manually, so you can go group by group and change the assignment. But if you have a plan and you have a lot of groups, you need to think and understand, okay, I want to sync multiple groups into the environment. This is the way I'm going to do it. Now, fifth element that is important, how will users be synced from existing systems? Not agents, users. Why is it a challenge? Because an agent is an agent. He has an agent ID or an agent name, he has skills. It's quite a simple entity comparing to a user. A user can have a username, can have permissions and roles inside the system that you're syncing from. And number 6 here on the slide actually connects to number 5. Before you decide, for example, to sync users from a system like IQ or CMS to Control Manager, you need to make sure that you have some kind of a matching between the permissions that this user has inside the system and Control Manager. In the IQ world, it's a little bit simpler because you have roles. So you can create the same roles in Control Manager, and then the user will be assigned to a role which is identical to his IQ original role. But when you look at a system like CMS, CMS doesn't have role-based access. You have dedicated permissions for a user, while Control Manager has role-based access. And that means that you need to define roles that matches permissions of CMS users. And it can be done. You need to go into the role section in Control Manager and make sure that you design the role which is identical to the type of permissions that the user has. But you need to plan it up front before you run the sync, before you click on the start button, and then later on you stumble into a problem and you need to clean your database because you forgot about these things. The roles and permission mapping is one of the biggest challenges, especially because a lot of systems from the old Avaya world do not have any role-based access, and they actually use a very old type of permission engine. So IQ, for example, it's a new approach, it's role-based access, you have less issues with it. If you look at other systems, you're starting to stumble into problems. You look at systems like older versions of Proactive Contact, CMS, even specific IC implementations. You might need to design the same type of permissions inside Control Manager. And it's not a complicated thing. You just need to do it before you do the sync. You need to go into Control Manager. You need to say, okay, these are all the permission types that I have inside my CMS, for example. These are all the users. Now I need to define roles that matches these types of permissions. And after you do it, you will be able to sync the environment in a way that will match. Now, the roles and permissions, of course, is something that can be done most of the times manually. Okay, what you need to do is you need to export, for example, I will take CMS again because it's the easiest thing that comes to my mind, but from any system, you need to export all the users and their permissions. In CMS, you just run a query on the Informix database and you get this information, and you can see all the combinations of the permissions. And you need to define the roles that will match it, and then your sync process will become simpler. Now, Designing the new processes for system administration is probably my favorite part because this is something that the administrators and the users inside the environment need to understand. They need to understand that they might need to tweak a little bit what they're doing today in order to leverage in the best way Control Manager. They might stick with what they know to do today, and they can still do it in Control Manager, but they might miss an added value that Control Manager will bring. And Control Manager basically is a game changer inside the environment because for the first time you can actually have people that have less knowledge in your Avaya world, and you can actually give them the ability to do something inside your Avaya environment without being scared that they will break something. So the new processes that you should introduce, you should take the new people that are, let's say, newer administrators to Control Manager, and their workflows might become a challenge. So what we recommend is to start small. For example, first of all, move to Control Manager people that are doing basic things, like, okay, all the people that are password reset owners, or all the people that only set up agents. These type of people, you can move to Control Manager first. And then what will happen is that you will not try to eat the entire cake with one bite, because just throwing all the users into Control Manager immediately after the setup, it will be a nightmare. You will be running around the users, trying to explain to them how they're doing things inside the environment. We recommend to go in a step-by-step approach that basically moves different type of people into the environment. Now, training is also a challenge, because training the users to use a new interface and moving them from this beautiful set of interfaces from Avaya into a new interface that is Control Manager might be a challenge, because people they're used to stuff. They like the old stuff. They know how to go between command line interfaces. They know everything inside CMS, even if you close their eyes. And moving to the web interface of Control Manager might become a challenge. So the question about who changed my interface and why suddenly I need to click on option X instead of option Y, sometimes users are very comfortable with the vintage style interface. And migrating them can be a challenge, but shouldn't be a challenge if you take the correct approach. We have a very clear recommendation. You need to define clear processes of how to create an agent, how to create an extension in Control Manager. Don't think that people will just log in and they will be able to do it without somebody telling them these are the steps that you need to take. It's not that the steps are complicated, but people that are used to using these old type of interfaces, they need some kind of guidelines, and defining the clear processes of how to. This is something that we're going to publish also in our wiki website, the how-to best practices of how to set up an agent, how to set up an extension. We have a set of videos in the wiki website that also explains it, and we would like people to start leveraging it. Now, even though Control Manager can offer several different ways to do something, pick the best way that fits your users and stick with it. So I can give you 5 different ways of navigating to the agent screen, creating an agent, and still I prefer to give people at the beginning one option, the best option that is best for them. Later on, after they're used to this option, you can open their eyes and show them, okay, you can also go here, you can also do there, you can go to Sphere, you can go to other elements. So try and show them a guided route inside the environment, and only later, after they're already using it, they can start exploring other elements inside the environment. Syncing schedule. Syncing schedule basically is here in order to not make people lazy. So the most common mistake that people do in deployments is that they say, okay, we have a sync process. We can schedule the sync process to run every hour. So let's schedule it to run every hour, and then we can continue using all the other Avaya tools, and it will not affect our environment. And at the end of the day, my conclusion is that this type of approach is let's be lazy, and let's allow people to do whatever they want, and we can still say we deploy the product, but they can still use whatever they want. And it's not that I'm against using the native interfaces. I know that I will never be able to stop people from going into the native interfaces for 2 reasons. Sometimes they're used to it and they want to do something that they think they can do quicker there. And also sometimes there is a feature that Control Manager doesn't support. But the fact that Control Manager can sync information doesn't need to take this and turn it into a disadvantage. So the most common mistake that people do is that they actually set up this multi-sync, an hourly sync inside the environment. And what we usually recommend people to do is that users should adopt Control Manager and not go to the native interfaces even though they can, because they need to understand Control Manager will bring them a lot of benefits. So even though if I create, for example, the extension in ASA, I can do it, let's say, with a single type, comparing to logging into a web interface and doing it there. But remember that it's not only about creating the one element. So what about, for example, configuring the extension to be recorded? So in Control Manager, it's just a checkbox. If you did the extension in ASA, you need to log in into the ACR recorder interface and do it over there. So you need to try and explain people that, okay, yes, you're used to it, but if you do it in Control Manager, the added value will be X, Y, and Z. And these added values, of course, depend on the type of connectors that you have inside your environment. And we strongly recommend that as part of the how-to steps to show to the customer what is the added value that he gets from doing it. And the sync can run inside the environment. It's not an issue. You can even run it every hour. But don't use the sync against the system itself. We recommend to use the sync process twice a day, maximum, maybe once a day or twice a day. Not because of technological challenges, but because of the fact that people need to understand that they get added value from Control Manager, and by giving them an hourly sync, basically tells them, I can keep doing whatever I do, and if a manager that bought the system will go into Control Manager, he will see the data updated, and this is not what we want to achieve. Cutover approach. The cutover approach, of course, is a big question. Why? Because there are different approaches, and actually every approach really depends on the customer that is involved and also on the business partner or the system integrator that is deploying the project. It needs to be decided based on the organization, of course, based on past experience, because sometimes the organization had a very bad experience with another system and you want to do a cutover which is step by step. Sometimes the organization feels very comfortable and they want to do a one-time cutover. We have a recommended pyramid approach for a cutover. And the pyramid approach says, first of all, take people that have very dedicated roles inside the environment. People that maybe never used the VI administration and now you want to expose to them as part of the role-based access of Control Manager specific features like help desk users or support users. Later on, add on top of it basic users with administrative roles. Then on top of it, cross-product administrators, people that are doing administrative changes that affect multiple products, like adding an agent to both CM and the proactive contact and IQ, for example, or adding an extension to both CM and a recording system. On top of it, theater owners, people that actually own a specific zone of the environment, for example, the workforce management administrator that owns the workforce management system can start using Control Manager. And at the end of the day, the system administrators, the full administrators, should move their work into the Control Manager environment. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be trained on the system first. Of course, the system administrators are the first people that should be trained, but at the evolution process of deploying the product, our best practice approach shows us that if you take, first of all, people from the support organization or from the help desk, you move them to Control Manager, and later on you add all the other people with the different layers. It will simplify the deployment process. It will reduce the number of questions of how do I do things, and it will make sure that the people that should support the product are capable of supporting it, and the system administrators, the high-level administrators that are doing things on a daily basis inside the environment will feel comfortable going into Control Manager. Okay, moving on to the next topic of our webinar, which is Control Manager Permissions, designing the permission structure. So it's probably one of the most common thing that people are using Control Manager for is creating some kind of permissions and role-based access to make sure that users of the environment will be using the product in a secure way and they will have access to a specific thing. And when you look at what does it mean to define roles and permissions in Control Manager, ACCM introduces basically a new word for role-based access control in your environment. When you deploy ACCM into an existing environment, you should take into consideration how will Control Manager change the way the environment is managed. Because a lot of times people that are not super administrators don't have access at all. And Control Manager might bring access for them if you are interested in doing it. So we recommend to identify the roles and user types that you have inside your environment today and compare them to what you will have when Control Manager is in. So maybe you have a one-to-one match between the Control Manager roles and permissions and what you have today inside your native administrative tools. The reality tells us that it's not a match because a lot of times people are adding additional roles or additional user types into the environment when Control Manager comes in. And doing the mapping and identifying it, what new user types you have is a key element because you need to decide how you're going to leverage the Control Manager permission engine, which has quite a lot of capabilities. Remember that the user permissions depend on several different elements and your dial plan can also impact the permissions. So it's not only roles, and this is exactly what we're going to see right now in the next following slide. ACCM version 7 and actually version 6.3 also, permission matrix, is shown in the following slide. So a user can be assigned to several different things inside the environment. And all these things can affect what he can do inside the environment. For example, a user is assigned to applications and roles. The user assignment to application and role affect which Avaya applications the user can access. So for example, if I'm assigned to IQ application and I have a role, that means I can use IQ based on the role that was assigned to me. If I'm assigned to Control Manager as an application and I have a role, it means I can use Control Manager. And this is the way it works for every other application inside the environment. A user can be assigned to locations to view. Locations to view are Control Manager locations, which means that based on the locations to view access of the user, you can decide which elements the user will be able to see. Now, what does it mean, elements? If I'm assigned to the location of Munich, for example, inside my environment, it doesn't mean I can see everything inside the location. The role that I have defines what can I do. For example, I can manage extensions, skills, and VDNs. But the locations to view access can affect which VDNs, which skills, and which extensions I'm able to manage. So the roles define what you can do, and the locations to view control on what you can perform the actions. Skills, VDNs, vectors, and campaigns to view are unique permissions inside Control Manager that allow you to assign to a user permission on a skill, on a campaign, on a VDN, or a vector without location dependency. For example, let's say theoretically we have two different locations, Munich and London. Both of them are on the same communication manager, for example. And I have a user in Munich that should see everything that is related to Munich, but also it should get access to one specific skill in London. So I don't want to give him locations to view access on the entire London location, because then he will see everything. So what I can do, I can use the skills to view and assign to the user access only to a specific skill. Now, the fourth element in the user matrix is groups to view. Groups to view represent the specific org chart elements that the user is capable of viewing. Now remember that every user and every agent inside the environment is assigned to a group, and that means that if I don't have access to a specific group, I will never be able to see people that are part of this specific group. Now, user assignment to applications control, again, which applications we're capable of seeing. So, for example, if my user in the bottom part of the screen is assigned to ACCM, IQ, CMS, and to WFO, that means these are the set of applications the user is capable of accessing, but without a role, the user is not able to do anything in these applications. So if I would try to log in into IQ or to WFO without an assignment of a control manager role, I will not be able to log in into this system. So this first level, which is user application, still doesn't allow us to do anything. It's just the assignment to the application. The next level that adds the roles actually controls what we are capable of doing inside the environment. But, like I mentioned earlier, the role does not control what the user can actually view. So the fact that I can actually access Control Manager with an administrative role, or I can actually access CMS or IQ, doesn't mean I can run a report on a specific routing point or a specific skill. So remember that this will allow you to control only what the user can and cannot do, but not on what. And then comes in the story of the locations to view. So the locations to view, user can be assigned to 0 to n location. And the locations to view permission control what you can actually view inside the environment. And every entity inside Control Manager, except of agents and users, is assigned to a location. So if a user has access to a location A and location B, he will be able to see all Avaya objects from location A and location B that his role allows him to access. So the role will say this user can access extensions and skills, and locations B and location A are assigned to him. That means he can see extensions and skills from location A and location B. But he cannot see any extensions and skills from location C and D because they are not assigned to the user. The groups to view represent the org chart elements. So the users and agents in Control Manager are part of the org chart, and the user's ability to access part of the org chart allows you to control which users and agents he will be able to manage. As you can see in the image in front of you, the user is assigned to Site A, Department A, and you can see team number 1 and all the users under the team. Team number 2, that is also part of Department A, is not assigned to this user. And that means that even though the user is capable of seeing Site and Department A, team number 2 under this Site and Department is not accessible by the user. He's not able to see or touch any one of the people under that specific team. Now, the VDNs, skills, vectors, and campaigns to view are a different story, and they're quite unique inside Control Manager because they are controlled by 2 elements. You can control them based on locations to view. So if I have a locations to view access rights on a specific location, and I also have access to see specific skills, I will be able to see all the skills of the location inside Control Manager. But as you can see in the image in front of you, in a specific scenario, the user has access to location A, and he can see all skills from location A. But in location B, he can see only skill X. This is the only skill he's capable of accessing. And that means that he has no access to location B. He cannot see any location B related element except of skill X. Now remember that VDNs, skills to view, vectors to view, and campaigns to view, these are permissions that are also provisioned into external Avaya systems. Systems such as CMS and IQ and also WFO require this information. So the user has capabilities of viewing a specific skill, controls also which reports he can run inside the CMS or IQ, or more correctly, on which skills he can run the reports. So these elements are a little bit different inside the Avaya world. Now, let's take an example. We have a user which is called Basic Admin. And this user has access to Control Manager as an application. He has a role which is called the Basic Admin role. And this role allows him to add, change, and delete skills. And he has access to location A and skill X. So if we open the Control Manager system, for example, inside my environment, and we'll take a look at the specific user. So we'll navigate inside the interface, and we'll search for the Basic Admin user. Here he is. We'll open the user record inside Control Manager. As you can see, this is the Basic Admin user. He has access to Control Manager as an application. In the permission section of the user, you can see that this user has access only to a role which is called the basic role. And this basic role allows him only to perform specific administrative tasks related to skills. Now, if you will try to log in with this user into the environment, and we'll open a clean interface of Control Manager, and we log in. This user is only capable of seeing things related to skills. So the access of the user to the skills and to the skills tab are completely controlled by the Control Manager role-based access engine. And without it, this user is not capable of touching anything inside the environment, which is quite powerful. And it's only one example, of course, out of many different examples that you're capable of showing inside the environment related to role-based access. Moving on to the last part of the presentation, which is high availability features and deployment options. So we decided to add it to this webinar because a lot of times we are asked through the wiki website and we're asked through the support email, what are the different high availability features and deployment options that Control Manager includes. And in order to answer this question, we decided to have this short section inside this specific webinar about high availability, and also to have a dedicated 90-minute webinar about high availability deployments that will be done later on next month or the months after. So first of all, I want to talk for a minute about infrastructure. So Control Manager, first of all, supports only Windows 2008 R2, okay, or Windows 2012. These are the only supported operation systems for Control Manager. Control Manager doesn't support any more 32-bit, starting from version 7. No 32-bit support, 64-bit only. It's fully tested on Windows 2012, currently finishing all the testing with Microsoft, so when it is released, you have the ability to install it on Windows 2012. Supported databases are MS SQL 2008 R2, Standard Enterprise or Express editions, and we'll talk in a minute when each type of database is used. We fully support virtualization platforms, which again, a very common question about virtualization and also about high availability support inside VMware, which I will cover in this section. So we support VMware, we support Microsoft Hyper-V and Zen. These are the supported virtualization platforms. There are 3 different high availability architectures that Control Manager can work in. And the reason to select one architecture over another depends on your needs. So the first high availability architecture that Control Manager support is what we call active-active with single access virtual IP address. This mode allows you to install 2 or more Control Manager instances inside the environment. Every instance is active, completely active, so every single one of the elements that are running in the Control Manager instance is working in parallel to the other server, and the user can log into any one of the Control Manager servers. So anywhere they will go, they can use a virtual IP address. This IP address will balance them between the relevant Control Manager instances, and they can use it. We also have an active-active Control Manager deployment with dedicated standalone access. That means that it is identical to the first option with the virtual IP address, but without the virtual IP address. This means that every Control Manager instance has an IP address, and you can log in into the instance, but the user needs to know to which instance he's browsing to. Even though all of the instances are active, and of course in parallel, you can log into any one of them. This is something, for example, that can be very useful if you deploy Control Manager over a very big geographical zone, and you have several Control Manager servers, for example, one in Germany, one in Japan, and one in the United States. Then you might want every single one of the users to log into the closest one, and you don't want to use a virtual IP address, so you can use this option. And option number 2 in high availability is active-passive. An active-passive is a situation where you have an active Control Manager server that is working, and only in case of a failover that this server fails and you need to move into some kind of a disaster mode, then the secondary server becomes active, and then what is important to understand is that this thing works very similar to ESS and LSP in the communication manager world, which means that all the changes that you do inside the secondary server in the active-passive mode will be lost when the active server is coming back online. So this type of deployment is designed mainly for LSP and ESS deployments that Control Manager supports. In the active-active deployments of Control Manager, you can use any one of the Control Manager servers anytime you want, even during failover, and when the server is back, the server that failed is back up and running, the system will sync and the data will be updated across all instances. Now, let's take a look at a couple of charts. First of all, this is an active-active situation that shows you the different layers of Control Manager. It doesn't mean that you need dedicated servers for each one of the application layers. Okay, you can have a server, one server that stores all the different components. You can have multiple servers. It's your call how to deploy it. As you can see, you have a virtual IP address that balances you between the web server, the application layer services, which are running all the different Control Manager components, such as the workflow component, the scheduling, the auditing, and many other components, has a heartbeat between it. So even if one of the application layers fails, then the second application layer can support all the requests from the second server. And there is a full bidirectional database replication between every single one of the Control Manager databases. So we have the databases of the Control Manager itself, the 1X Central Management, and the Experience Portal / Voice Portal Administration. All these databases are fully synchronized in a bidirectional way, which means every change that is done in each one of them is synced to another. The dedicated IP address architecture basically removes only one component. It is identical to what we've seen in the previous slide. The only difference is that there is no virtual IP address. You need to know where you are browsing. All other elements of the architecture are exactly identical. So you have the heartbeat between the application components, and you have a lot of different other elements on the database level. Now, if you look at what you can do in active-active mode, this is an example of a multi-data center deployment. This shows you 3 data centers that are distributed in different places. In each one of the data centers, you have a dedicated Control Manager system that is active, and all Control Manager systems are fully active inside the environment, which means you can log into each one of them. Each one of the Control Manager systems is capable of basically performing administration of Avaya systems in each one of the data centers. So for example, the Control Manager number 1 system from data center number 1 can perform administration of the Avaya systems in both data center 2 and data center 3. So it's not a dedicated Control Manager system that can do administration only for the Avaya systems in data center number 1. It is still cross data center provisioning, but each one of the Control Manager systems can do it. So in parallel, you can log into any one of them, or you can use the virtual IP address. And as you can see, all these systems fully supported and redundant. Now, if you look at an active-passive deployment is different. First of all, you have a master server, web server, and a secondary web server. The web server, or the entire Control Manager instance, which is secondary, it's not active. You cannot use it in a day-to-day use. Only when you move to a disaster mode. The disaster mode can be decided in 2 ways. Either manually by the user, which can say, okay, I move to disaster mode and I want to turn on the secondary capability, or the heartbeat connection between the servers can also make this decision. The database replication is one way. So there is one-way replication between the master and the secondary. There is also an option later on to recover the secondary data to the master in case it is required, but it's a manual process. It's not automatic. Now, this deployment type of active-passive supports the use of Microsoft SQL Server Express in the secondary node. So in the 2 previous slides that we've seen, you must have Microsoft SQL Server Standard or Enterprise Edition in the 2 nodes, but this specific deployment, which is active-passive, can support a SQL Server Express in the secondary server. And this is designed especially for ESS and LSP. So, for example, in ESS and LSP sites, you might have a Microsoft SQL Express on your secondary control manager instance, and then in case of a failover, you can see that the control manager, the secondary instance, can only manage the ESS or LSP system, so it cannot manage the primary system, and this is again designed especially for Avaya architecture. VMware high availability support, which is the last thing I will touch. We fully support VMware vMotion and VMware fault tolerance for HA. It's fully tested inside our labs for every version. We support it, and we have no problems with this type of deployment. If you buy a control manager and you want to deploy it in a vMotion mode, you have basically the need, when you request the control manager license, to state that you want to use vMotion, so the license that will be generated for you will allow you to basically run control manager in a vMotion-based mode. So that was my last slide. First of all, I want to thank everybody that was able to stay for the entire 2 hours for sticking by. I hope that we covered things that are interesting for you guys. And we're going to do more and more webinars like it, and I hope that you will be able to join them, and other people from your organization will also be able to join them in the future, because we really want to spread our knowledge around control manager everywhere that is possible. I will